In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti, Amen. Troivo ad altare Deum. Adiutorium nostrum in nomine Domini.
Confiteor Dei Omnipotenti, Beate Mariae, Sancta Virgine, Beatum Michael Arcangelo, Beatum Ioanni Baptiste, Sanctis Apostolis Petro et Paolo, omnibus sanctis et vobis fratres, quia peccabilis cogitatione verbo et opere. Mea culpa, mea maxima culpa, Ideo precor Beata Mariam, Sancta Virgine, Beatum Michael Arcangelo, Beatum Ioanni Baptista, Sanctus Apostolos Petro et Paolo, omnes sanctos, et vos fratres, orare pro me, ad Dominum Deum nostrum.
Amen.
Mea maxima culpa. Ideo precor Beata Maria, Sancta Virgine, Beatum Michael Arcangelo, Beatum Ioanni Baptista, Sanctus Apostolos Petro et Paolo, Sanctus et Pater, orare pro me, Dominum Deum nostrum.
Miserator est omnipotens Deus et dimissis peccatus vestris caducat vos ad vita aeternam. Indulgentiam absolutionem et remission de peccatorum nostrorum, tribuat nobis omnipotens et misericordias Dominus. Deus tu conversus vivificatis nos. Ostende nobis Domini, misericordia tua. Domini exaudi orationem meam. Dominus vobiscum. Oremus. Iudicat Domini innocentesime expugnantesime apprende amas futur, et exorge in adiutorium meum Domini virtus salutissime, et fundet fameam et conclude adversus seus qui versicul sume, dic anime mei salus tua ego sum, iudicat Domini innocentesime, expugnantesime, apprende amas futur, et exorge in adiutorium meum Domini virtus salutissime. Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. Christe eleison. Kyrie eleison. Kyrie eleison. Dominus vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Oremus. Daque sumus omnipotens Deus, ut qui in tot adversis et in nostra summitate difficimus, inter silentium geniti Filii Tui passione respiremus, qui te cum vivitet regna, cum Deo Patre in unitate Spiritus Sancti, Deus per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Oremus. Deus qui non mortens in penitentiam desideras peccatorum, populum tuum ante revertentem propitius respice, ut dum tibi devotus existit, iracundie tue flagella, a Deo clementera moveas. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui te cum vivitet regna, in unitate Spiritus Sancti, Deus per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Lexio Isaiae prophete. Diebus edis dixit Isaias, Dominus Deus aperuit vici aurem, ego autem non contradico recorsum non agi. Corpus meum dedifercutientibus et genas meas velentibus, pace mea non averti ab crebatibus et conspuentibus in me. Dominus Deus auxiliator meus, ideo non sum confusus. Ideo posui facie meam petram durissimam et cio, quoniam non confunda. Iuxta est qui justificatio, quis contradicet vici, stemus simul quis est adversarius meus, ecce accedat ad me, ecce Dominus Deus auxiliator meus, quis est, qui condemnet me, ecce omnes quanti vestimentum conderantur, tinea domine Deus, quis ex vobis dimens Dominum audiens vocem servis sui, qui ambulavit in tenebris et non est lumenei, speret in nomine Domini, et editatur super Deum suum.
Deo gratias.
Exorce Domini, et intende judicio meum Deus meus et Dominus meus in causa mea, funde fameam et conclude adversus seus qui me persecutur. Domine non secundum peccata nostra, qui fecimus nos, neque secundum iniquitates nostras retribuas nobis. Domine, ne remineris iniquitatum nostrum antiquarum, cito anticipent nos misericordiae Tui, quia pauperes factis sumus nimis.
Adiuva nos Deus salutaris noster et propter gloriam Dominis Tui Domine libera nos,
et propitius est peccatis nostris, opter Domini tuus. Dominus vobiscum,
et cum spiritu tuo.
sequentia Sancti Evangelii secundum Ioannem.
Gloria Dei.
Ante sexties parte venit Iesus Bethaniam, Lazarus tueram apus quae Iesus, cerunt autem in cenavi, et Martha ministrava, Lazarus vero unus erat ex discudentibus cum eo. Maria et loacepit libram unguenti nardi pistici preciosi, et sic pedes Iesu, et exercit pedes eius capillis suis, et domus impleta est ex odore unguenti. Dixit ergo unus ex discipulis eius Judas Iscariotes, qui erat quem ium traditus, quam hoc unguentum non venit recentis de nardis, datum est ecetis. Sit autem hoc non quia de egenis pertinebant ad eum, sed quia pur erat, et locus abens ea quemitebantur portabant. Dixit ergo Jesus, sinite illa, ut in tiem sepulturem eis servent illud. Pauperis enim semper apetis vobiscum, me autem non semper apetis. Coniovit ergo turba multa ex Judeis, quia illic est, et venerum non propter Iesu tandum, sed Lazarum viderat, quem suscitavit a mortuis. Translation of the Gospel for Monday in Holy Week. Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Pasch, came to Bethania, where Lazarus had been dead, whom Jesus raised to life. And they made him a supper there. And Martha served, but Lazarus was not one of them that were at table with him. Mary therefore took a pound of ointment of right spikenard and of great price, and anointed the feet of Jesus, and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the odour of the ointment. Then one of his disciples, Judas Iscariot, he that was about to betray him, said, "Why was not this ointment sold for 300 pence and given to the poor?" Now he said this not because he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief, and having the purse, carried the things that were put therein. Jesus therefore said, "Let her alone, that she may keep it against the day of my burial. For the poor you have always with you, but me you have not always." A great multitude therefore of the Jews knew that he was there, and they came, not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might see Lazarus, whom he had raised from the dead. Opening this week of the Holy Week, and 3 days at before the Triduum, I would like to remind you that there are still palms, blessed palms, available with unholy water at the back of the church, the front door of the church, at your disposal. So please take a moment when you are going for your shopping to come and feed your soul as well by taking these palms.
They have great graces, as we know. They carry and bring graces throughout the year. Also, after I had a few questions, all the ceremonies will be live streamed as much as we can in church. With following all the mass times, the schedule we published before the closure of the church. So there's no change in the times. Just one change, sorry. There is the Easter Mass would be celebrated at 9:30 instead of 10:30. If you need confession, please do not hesitate to contact one of the canons, email or text message or telephone. We are available. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Ghost. Amen. The Passion of Christ is clearly at hand now in the Gospel, mentioned the 6 days before the Passion of the celebration of the Pasch of the Jews. We are here in presence of two prophets. Well, they didn't know they were prophets, but as a matter of fact, they become prophets of the Passion. One, I would say, the light side of the Triduum, the prophet of the light, the prophet of the life, the prophet of the resurrection, is clearly Lazarus. He is mentioned 3 times, and people who come to this meal in Bethania would come also to see Jesus, but not only. They would want to see Lazarus, who had been raised from the dead. They want to see the resurrection, the effect of the mightiness of Christ in the resurrection, in seeing Lazarus living and eating with them. This prophet of the light is clearly the prophet of the resurrection, and also one detail, he is the prophet, also the prophet of the supper, the Last Supper, as St. John says. They made him a supper, and for some reason St. John says, but Lazarus was one of them that were at table. We don't really see why St. John would have underlined this detail, if not to announce something, if not for a specific purpose. Definitely, this supper, this Last Supper with Lazarus, would symbolize, and it's an anticipation of the Last Supper of Christ with his apostles at the cenacle for the celebration of the first Mass and the ordination to the priesthood. Mary was there, and Martha was there. These women were here for attending and serving this Last Supper, which is in a way similar to the Last Supper of Christ, surrounded by all the people who would live the Passion with him or follow him or not. And also, but in the meantime, this supper is very different from Christ's supper with his apostles, because at the supper there was no Mary, no Martha, no Lazarus, only the future priests of the church. This supper at Bethania is the supper for the people who love him. He is, I'd say, his adorers, the adorers of the divinity of Christ. At the cenacle in a few days, the Last Supper of Christ would be fully dedicated to the institution of the sacrifice of the Mass, fully dedicated to catechize the apostles, these first priests, regarding the liturgical celebration, and Christ would teach them all the rites of the celebration at this time, and how to make a reserve with the Blessed Sacrament, etc., as St. Catherine Emmerich details in her vision, in the private revelation, but why not using them? These suppers are similar because there are suppers of the friends of Christ, but the second one is the priestly friends of Jesus Christ. This is the light side of this gospel. The joy of the resurrection is still at hand, is about to be shared, but before there is a dark side, the passion, the sufferings of Christ, with this prophet of death, Judas. Judas is here, and see his robe in this supper. He attends, of course, but clearly he has already lost his love. He attends the supper of the lovers of Christ, but he's not worthy. He is here because by vocation he is an apostle, and Christ leaves him the last chance, until the last chance. Even at this supper, he can see the love of people, the love, and in particular, the charity of Mary Magdalene, anointing the feet of Christ with a pound of oil, of ointment. And you can see, and Christ urges all the prophecies and gives a final warning to Judas. Let her do. Let her alone. She may keep it this oil for the day of my burial. He announces his death not only to all the group of people, but clearly addressing directly to Judas, I will die, and you will be the instrument. You probably don't know it, but this is your wish, and this is what is about to happen if you do not change your heart. This address to Judas is even more direct than the words of Christ to Judas during the Last Supper at the cenacle. These words, 6 days before his passion, are clearer, are manifest, are direct. He faces Judas and says, don't do that. At the Last Supper, he doesn't say this so clearly, just say, go and do what you have to do, because now the decision is made. But whilst the decision is not made, in Judas' heart, he gives him an opportunity, a gap of light, a gap for the grace to be followed. But Judas refuses. And see the argument of Judas. He hides himself. He doesn't want to adore Christ as God. He probably knows it, but he refuses to worship God, the incarnation. He refuses the salvation, which is now clearly visible and addressed to him. But he decides to betray him, and this is clearly. And see how he, as an hypocrite, he hides himself behind the cost of the anointment. This is too expensive. Why? Give it to the poor. And he uses the poor as an argument, as a fake and a fake argument against Christ. Christ against the poor. This argument of Judas is the poorest argument, because it's the argument of the desperate. He can't see any escape. He can't see how he would keep this money in the purse, to steal it, by the way. He cannot see any way. He doesn't want anyone to worship and to recognize the divinity of Christ. He doesn't want anyone to announce also either his burial. He doesn't want anyone to prophesize the death, the passion, the death, and the resurrection. He does not want to see this, and he cannot find another solution. There is no solution, and this is the drama of Judas in this particular gospel today. He places the poor forward as an argument. No, let's give this money for the poor, because they are worth carrying, and they are even more worth carrying than Christ. But this is wrong, and Christ knows this, because this is a fake argument. And he says, no, there is nothing more you can spend on me, on the adoration of the veneration of the divinity, not on Christ only, divinity, but on the next generation. This is one of the reasons from this gospel why the church decides in the liturgy to spend even material means to make the liturgy, as I would never probably achieve that on earth, as the Emeritus Pope Benedict said in Paris one time, our liturgies on earth are a true, but a very pale glimpse of the liturgy in heaven, of the grandeur and the glory of the liturgy at the throne of God. But although we are just a glimpse, only a ray in this world, we have to spend as much as we can to keep our liturgies as beautiful, because this is why we've got some means to be spent on the adoration of Christ, because He is our God, He is our Lord, and He is our Redeemer. And Mary Magdalene, who represents all of us sinners, but also recipients of the grace of God, she knows that there is nothing expensive enough to be presented at the altar of God. Because if we spend what we have for the glory of God, and in particular at the altar where He is really sacramentally present, He will reward us. Not because we are seeking the reward, but we know that this is absolutely right and just, and we cannot hide ourselves behind other reasons. If we don't want to spend our means on to express the perfection of the divine worship in heaven, we are going the wrong way. We pretend and we hide ourselves on other things. It doesn't mean that the church, you see in the history of the church, both are possible. Caring for our blessed Lord, really present, as well as caring for the poor. Remember that the most magnificent and greatest hospitals were built in the old days and centuries ago by the church, and how many orders would care for the sick, how many nuns and sisters and priests and brothers and Catholics have cared, a long time cared for the sick, not just for their souls, but at this time also for their bodies. We can do both things. Surely we can, for the very reason that God is immensely and infinitely perfect, and He can provide. If we doubt that He can do both, He can give us means to adore Him and means to care for the poor, we don't believe He is immensely rich by essence. Have we forgotten this? Or do we still believe He is immensely rich to enrich everyone and to give us enough means to celebrate Him in His glory as a glimpse on earth? But this is the true worship. And this is, in the meantime, the true charity towards the poor. See Judas. He doubted, and he didn't think God was rich enough in His grace, to forgive him. And that was the last sin, or one of the last sins of Judas. He did not believe, as we read in the Passion yesterday. He threw the money in the temple. He was in despair and he hung himself. He didn't believe in the immense capacity of forgiveness in God, which is endless and infinite, no barriers and no limits. Was he doubting at this moment, during this meal at Lazarus? Probably yes. He was doubting already. And because he was doubting, he put forward the care for the poor, despising our Lord. And this is the other way around. The more we care for Christ, the more means we get for people in need, in their soul and in their body. In the name of the Father, of the Son, of the Holy Ghost. Amen.
Dominus vobiscum. Oremus. Deripeme Dei limitis meis, domine a te confugi, docere et facere voluntatem tua, quia Deus meus est tu. per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Dominus vobiscum,
Et cum spiritu tuo.
sursum corda.
Habemus Domini.
Gratias regamus Domino Deo nostrum.
Dignum et justum es.
Vere dignum et justum est securum et salutare. Nostri sapere tubique gratias adire Domini Sancte Pater omnipotens aeterne Deus, qui salutem humani genuis in nino crucis constituisti, ut unde mors oriebatum in de vita resurgeret, et qui nino vincebat in nino quoque vinceretur per Christum Dominum nostrum, per quo maiestatem tuam verdant angeli, adorum dominationes trinum potestates, celi celorum et ac beata seraphim, socia exultatione concelequant, cum quibus et nostras voces, ut admiti jubeas de peccamur, supplici confessione dicentes. Sanctus, 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 Dominus Deus Sabaoth, benedictum celi et terra, gloria tua, Hosanna in excelsis, benedictus qui venit in nomine Domini, Hosanna in excelsis.
nobis quoque peccatoribus. Per omnia saecula saeculorum. Oremus. Precepis salutaribus voluntia divina institutione formati, audemus dicere, Pater noster, qui es in celis, sanctificetur nomen tuum, adveniat regnum tuum, fiat voluntas tua, sicut in cielo et in terra. Panem nostrum quotidianum da nobis hodie, et dimite nobis debita nostra, sicut et nos dimitimus debitoribus nostris, et ne nos inducas in tentationem,
sed libera nos a malo.
Per omnia saecula saeculorum. Pax Domini sit semper vobiscum.
Et cum spiritu tuo.
Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi, miserere nobis. Agnus Dei qui tollis peccata mundi, dona nobis pacem.
Dominum sum Deus. Dominum sum Deus.
Per restante perseverantum sigur qui gratulum tu magis meis in duantum pudore reverentia qui maligna locumentura versus me. Dominus vobiscum
et spiritu tuo.
Oremus. Trevelant nobis Domini Dimium tua sancta fervore, quo eo comparitere caput delectemur et fructum, per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum vivit et regnat, in unitate Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Oremus. Exaudi nos Deus salutaris nostre, et populum tuum a miracundi tue terroribus liberum, et misericordiae tue fac agitate securum. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum vivit et regnat, in unitate Spiritus Sancti Deus, per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Oremus, humiliate capitalis vadebit. Adiuva nos Deus salutaris nostre, et beneficia reculerunt apribus nos instaurare dignatus, tribue venire gaudentes. Per Dominum nostrum Iesum Christum Filium tuum, qui tecum vivit et regnat, in unitate Spiritus Sancti, Deus per omnia saecula saeculorum.
Amen.
Dominus vobiscum,
Et in spiritu tuo.
benedicamus Dominum,
Deo gratias.
benedicat vos omnipotens Deus, Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sanctus. Dominus vobiscum,
Et in spiritu tuo.
initium Sancti Evangelii secundum Ioannem.
Gloria Dei.
In principio erat verbum et verbum erat apud Deum et Deus erat verbum. Hoc erat in principio apud Deum, omniam ipsum facta sunt, et sine ipsum factum est dicot factum, et sine ipsum vita erat, et vita erat lux omnium, et lux in tenebris lucet et tenebriam comprehenderunt. Fuit omnibus ad Deum qui nomen erat Johannes. Hic venit in testimonium per imere de lumine, ut omnes crederent per illum. Non erat de lux, sed in testimonium per imere de lumine. Erat lux veracum lumina, omnem lumina dignantem in mundo. In mundo erat et mundus per influm factus est, et mundus eum non coniovi. In propria venitent sui eum non receperunt. Quod codatem receperunt eum. Delites potestatem filios Dei fieri, isque credunt in nomine eius, qui ex sanguinicus, neque ex voluntate carnis, neque ex voluntate Dei, sed ex Deo natis sunt. Et verbum carne factum est, et habitavit in nobis. Et vidimus gloriam eius gloriam quasi unigenitia Patrem plenum gratiae et veritatis.
Deo gratias.
In merit of Christ the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee, blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed the fruit of thy womb, Jesus.
Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners now and at the hour of our death. Amen.
Hail the Holy Queen, Mother of mercy, hail our life, our sweetness, and our hope. To thee do we cry, poor banished children of Eve. To thee do we stand at our sides, mourning and weeping, in days where no tears. Turn thy rosary, righteous advocate, and eyes of mercy towards us, but of the face our exile, show unto us the blessed fruit of thy womb, Jesus. O clement, O loving, O sweet Virgin Mary, pray for us, O Holy Mother of God.
That we may be worthy of the promises of Christ.
Let us pray. O God, our refuge and our strength, look down in mercy on thy people who cry to thee, and by the intercession of the glorious and immaculate Virgin Mary, Mother of God, of St. Joseph, her spouse, of thy blessed apostles, Peter and Paul, and of all the saints. In mercy and goodness, hear our prayers for the conversion of sinners, and for the liberty exaltation of our Holy Mother, the Church, through the Son Christ our Lord.
Amen.
Holy Michael, our King, defend us from the day of battle. Be our safeguard against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, thrust down to hell Satan and all wicked spirits who wander through the world for the ruin of souls. Amen. Most Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Have mercy on us.
Most Sacred Heart of Jesus.
Have mercy on us.
Most Sacred Heart of Jesus.